So that's what the talk tonight's about. I think Tina, I'm sure, explained the format, but I'll give you a little chalk talk. At the end, I'll let all of you be a chance to be a doctor. I am looking for some help on evenings. You guys want to see how you do on a little test we give you, and then my wife Mary and I will split up, and we'll check you guys out and see those who want to be checked out, and see if what you have we can ignore or if we need to take a piece of it. So basically, there are only 3 kinds of skin cancers. That makes it pretty easy to talk about. 2 of the 3 are typically not fatal. I'd like to say never fatal, but then somebody's going to look it up on WebMD or Mayo Clinic and say there was 1 fatality once, but in general, 2 of the 3 are not fatal. And then you might say, well, then why are they cancer? Well, under the microscope, there's mitosis and all the things that define cancer, and by definition, they will continue to grow, so they are bad, but they typically don't spread, or the word doctors use is metastasize. They don't go to the bones and brain and liver and all that. So that technically, when you take it out, you're cured. A basal cell cancer is one of the 3. A squamous cell cancer is the second. But the only one that really will take your life shorter is a melanoma. Oops, let's go back a little bit. So those are the 3 skin cancers that exist. Usually, if we were giving a talk on other cancers, I'd say, and then there's 10 rare, weird kinds, but in this case, they're not. That's all there are, 3 skin cancers. The top 2 are curable. The bottom one could be curable, but also could not be curable, depending when you find it. I apologize for the blurriness, but would you guess what that is? I'll give you a hint. We're going in order, so the first thing was basal cells. This is a basal cell skin cancer.
Are they always red?
Yeah, usually. Not always, usually. Now, this is a very extreme example. Most doctors, and even those of you in the room who aren't doctors, would probably look at that and go, oh, that's ugly. That's probably a skin cancer, and it is. That's a basal cell skin cancer. Only in the quiz at the end did we sneak some benign lesions. So everything you see here will be a skin cancer. It's circular, red, and in the middle it's ulcerated. You can see that. So that's, if we saw that on a skin screen, if we see one of these tonight, we'll schedule to take it off. The good news is, excellent chance the cure rate will be 100% if we take it off. So that's the good news. You say, well, what if I didn't come in tonight and stayed there for 10 years? As I said, would not shorten your life. It just would get bigger and uglier and worse and deeper. Another basal cell in the middle, almost looks like a peace sign where I'm standing, but if you look at it, there's little blood vessels, and that's little new blood vessels are a classic sign of skin cancer. So that's also a basal cell. They're not usually quite that target lesion-like, but this one is, and quite a few that I take off are. Now that could almost be any blemish on your body. I mean, obviously they blew that up quite a bit. And this is the one that's supposed to scare you because probably all of you have something that looks kind of like that on you right now. And how would you know? Well, if I saw this in a skin screen, the reason I'd want to biopsy it are 2 things. See how the borders aren't pretty? They're kind of irregular, almost like you threw a paintbrush of red paint and it kind of, the edges are out here. So that's one good clue that it's a basal cell. And I mentioned the blood vessels. Where you're sitting, you can see it, but there's these blood vessels here. And like I said, new blood vessels that didn't exist before in a lesion are very suspicious for cancer. Not 100%, but pretty suspicious. The nose is a classic place. Today, in my practice, I did about 4 or 5 skin screens. A lot of them were physicals. And the patient said, okay, please do a skin screen, okay. And the first thing I went to the nose. I started the nose and forehead and face because basal cell is the most common place to get a basal cell is on the nose. Obvious reason, these skin cancers I'll get to in a few minutes are sun-induced almost always. And we might put sunscreen on our back and arms and legs and back of the neck, the forehead. But sometimes we forget the nose. And as you walk around, even if you don't go to the beach or play tennis in the sun, just walking around town, your nose gets a lot of exposure. So there's a basal cell on the nose right here. Again, you can see blood vessels and there with ulceration. That'd be very easy to take off, and that would be a complete cure, but pretty obvious basal cell there. Another basal cell. This also looks like something a lot of you could have there, but the key thing, it's red. This one's fairly flat. It doesn't matter if they're flat or raised. That doesn't help us too much. But in this case, it's relatively flat, so that not help. There's a little tiny nodule in the middle there, and I can see from here a few blood vessels, and mostly it's just irregular borders. All those give you clues. Now, if you said, well, if we took that off and it came back not a basal cell, would it shock you? No, not at all. That could easily be what they call a solar keratosis, which is a fancy name for a sunspot. And if it's a sunspot, totally benign. And then you'd say, well, if that could be a sunspot or a basal cell, how would you know? Well, that's why you're here, and that's why we'll biopsy it. We wouldn't know unless we biopsy it, so that's why we do that. And that's, I believe, on somebody's forehead. You can see how it looks like in the middle there's like a little crater, and the skin's kind of taut and irregular and kind of mean looking. So again, as ugly as that looks, easy to cure. Cut it out and have a little scar there, but you're cured. Basal cells, as you can see on my next slide, you can see where the basal cell is. The yellow thing growing there is the cancer, and there's a layer there under the epidermis. The epidermis is kind of the fatty top layer, and it's called the basal cell because it sits right on top of the basement membrane. This is all microbiology, and don't worry about it. Some of you might find it interesting to see where it comes up. The cancer starts in the basal cell just above the basement membrane, and then it elevates to the epidermis. Now again, you might be thinking, God, that thing's huge, and it's starting really deep, and it's coming above the skin. Well, no, this is microscopically enlarged. In real life, you could barely see all this. So. Basal cells are due typically to three things. There's a slide at the end, I'm getting ahead of myself, but definitely basal cells are genetic. I'm kind of giving away the whole talk. All skin cancers are genetic. But if you're in your 60s or 50s and your mom or dad had basal cells in their 50s and 60s, good chance you're going to get a basal cell. Even if they were in the sun and you weren't, or they were fair skinned and you're darker, it doesn't matter. If a first-degree relative has a basal cell, meaning a parent or a sibling, a very good chance you're going to get one. Second is sun exposure, and it does come after genetics. Genetics is the heaviest predictor, then sun. And that's why we see it so much on the forearms and on the face, because when you get dressed and leave, typically those are the areas you're going to be exposed, the forearms and the face. I hate to be sexist, but I've noticed this, that a red spot on the left arm of a gentleman is usually a basal cell, and the right arm is usually a sunspot, and in females, it's exactly the opposite. A basal cell on the right arm, a red spot on the right arm is a basal cell, and the left arm is solar keratosis because of sun coming in from cars when you're driving. Frequently the male is the main driver and the woman sits next to him, and so the sun gets the woman's right arm and the guy's left arm. You say, well, my job, I'm in an office all day, I hate the sun, I never go out in the sun, I've only gone to one daytime angel game. Am I at risk for basal cell? That's a big help. If you've had a lifetime avoiding the sun, you're in pretty good shape. What the problem is, we're in Southern California. We live outside, we love outside, we're outside all the time. The hobbies we do are beach, surfing, swimming pools, golf, tennis, mountains, rivers, sea doing. That's what we do in Southern California. So most of you lived most of your life in Southern California. You've got a lot of sun without you even realizing it. Third is age. Basal cells are very rare under 50, I mean. I did take a couple off last year, like mid-40s, and I was very surprised. I'm not sure I've ever taken off at a 30-year-old, possibly. But 50 and over is the key thing. And if I'm taking a red spot in an 80-year-old, excellent chance it's a basal cell. So advancing age is a risk, sun exposure is a risk, genetics are a risk. How do we treat it? Number one, I put freeze. For those who've seen me or your doctor on this campus, for those who see that, styrofoam cup, you put in the liquid nitrogen, Q-tip, and you start freezing. A lot of other places use canisters with guns. Those are kind of cool too. Doesn't matter, but liquid nitrogen will kill the basal cell. It'll also kill a sunspot, so it's a good general thing to do. The disadvantage to freezing these is that we won't be able to biopsy. So if somebody had a red spot on their forearm, typically want to have it biopsied, didn't really want to be poked and have scalpels put on there, and said, can you freeze it? And we say, of course, happy to freeze it. So we freeze it, it goes away. And go, oh, it worked, thanks. What was it? I don't know. Could have been a basal cell? Yeah, could have been. I don't know. So, but because the cure rate of basal cells is 100%, probably doesn't matter if you freeze it or cut it out. I'm a big freezing fan for those, I see a few of my patients out in the audience. I love freezing. It's cheap, it's safe. It hurts a little bit, not bad, but a sting. So I'm a big proponent of freezing basal cells or red spots. There's chemotherapeutic creams, the big one's called Effidex. There's other names, Aldera is another name of one. One big advantage and two main disadvantages. These are creams out of a tube and you rub it on the red spot and typically it goes away. 80-90% success rate. Maybe a few percent under the freezing. It works really well because you're putting a cream on. There's no doctors and no pain really and no cutting, and so it's great. Yeah. Two disadvantages actually. One is the same thing. You're not going to be able to biopsy, put the cream on it. And then number two, it does sting. And well, I guess number three, it's very expensive, although most insurances do cover it. I'm told, I never bought it personally, but I'm told $200-300 a tube, so it's not cheap. Now if you have a good insurance, copay, it'd be less, but I give it out because I would prefer to freeze. I probably freeze way more than I give out the chemo creams. They're really popular in people who prefer not to be scarred, so maybe the face of a woman or a younger person would want to do it because it doesn't scar compared to, of course neither is freezing, but compared to surgery. Cautery are those little electric needle machines you see in our offices. Doctors use it. We have to numb the area with Novocaine, so that's a stick with a needle. Then you're numb, and then we could use the electric needle or the cautery to burn it off. If you say, well, I went to a dermatologist to use laser, or I heard you could use lasers, I don't know. I equate laser and cautery. There's absolutely no difference other than laser is a very fine beam, and cautery is a little less fine beam. But they do the same thing, they're equivalent. Cautery is just a lot cheaper to buy the unit, but it works just as well. The cure rate is equivalent for the two of them. The advantage is with freezing, you're 85-95% sure you got it. With cautery, you're close to 100% sure, 99% sure you got it. So it's much more definitive. Plus, you can do a biopsy. You do a very, very thin shave. Shave goes off to the pathologist, and what's left over, you use the cautery on it. So I do a lot of cautery for basals, especially if they're really big, or some of those ugly ones you saw with the ulcers and blood vessels. I would cauterize those. Got to bring up Mohs surgery. Dr. Moh, last century, came up with this concept. Instead of doing the shave and the cautery, like most doctors do, I'll shave it even thinner. I'll have a special scalpel, and it'll be like paper thin shave. Then I'll have a truck in the parking lot with a microscope and a pathologist there, or we'll run it out there. He'll look at it. If he thinks there's still some basal cell on that, we'll come back, we'll do it a second time, run that out to the truck. Still some there, we'll go out and do it a third time. And so Mohs, typically you schedule an entire day for. You may only be at the doctor for 2, 3, 4 hours, but they usually book the entire day. For that reason, it tends to be pretty expensive. It's probably the most cosmetic way to get rid of it, though, because you don't have to go very deep. You can go very, very superficial until you find it. I'm not a big Mohs fan because, to me, to do the cautery here, we bill the insurance company $300 and probably get 150, 200. For those on our cash price that Tina posts, I'm not sure, I'm guessing it's a couple $100 on our cash. For those that don't have insurance, that's all in with trays and all that. Mohs would be $1,000 or $2. So it's much, much more because of the time and pathologists involved, and trucks they're bringing in and all that kind of stuff. So, but again, I think if you want it done the most cosmetic way and you want to be 100% sure every part of it's gone, I think Mohs is a good procedure. The last one says excise, meaning you just cut it out. And I don't mean shave, I mean you actually make a wedge that, you know, looks that big around and sew it up with stitches. Very rare, in my opinion, to do that for a basal cell that you think is a basal cell. More likely, you think it's a melanoma, you take it off, and it comes back a basal cell, and you go, oh, I thought it was a melanoma. I don't know many doctors that would excise a basal cell that they really thought was a basal cell, only because it's overkill. These things all work so well. Why would you want to make a bigger scar and a bigger procedure, more expensive, it bleeds, and all that kind of thing. So, those are the 5 ways to treat a basal cell. I did want to make this a little bit informal and interactive. Anybody, before I move on to the next cancer, have questions, comments? Yes?
Can you shave and then freeze?
No, because the freezing will get all yucky because there'll be blood and then you're putting ice on the blood and that's not good. You can freeze, and if it doesn't go away in a week, then shave. You can do that. You can shave and then cauterize. And actually, what I didn't get into, there's something called shave, desiccate, curette times 3. So you're shaving using a scooper and then electrifying it, and you do that 3 times in a row the same visit. Yes.
If you freeze, can it go back in the same spot?
Oh yeah. Freezing probably has a 15 to 25% recurrence rate because you don't know how deep you're going when you freeze. And then the cautery might have a 5% recurrence rate, and these two would have almost a 0% recurrence rate. Yes?
Are they always red, or does it depend on skin tone?
No, it depends on a lot of things. The pictures I did show are red, I agree. And they're usually red, but no, I took one off a couple weeks ago that was kind of darkish, like a brown kind of look. And sometimes they're flesh colored and all kinds of stuff. So I've never taken one off that's been black. I've never taken one off that's a black mold. But has anybody in the audience had Mohs by chance? Yeah. Did you guys like it? It was a cosmetic.
Like you said, it was all day.
Yeah. Question in the very back. You talk loud.
Yes, I was just going to ask because of the darker pigmentation. How do you know the difference?
On a basal cell or any skin cancer? Well, statistically, you're in pretty good shape. Very unlikely somebody with your skin tone will get skin cancer. But you're right, it'd be hard given the darkness of the skin to pick it up. So fortunately, the vast majority we would probably freeze and not know. But I don't think I've ever taken a basal cell off anybody of Puerto Rican, black, very dark skin race. So I guess it's possible. Okay, let's move on to another thing. Yes, I'm sorry.
Just one question. You called it red and ulcerated, and I wasn't sure what ulcerated meant.
Ulcerated means in the middle there's like a hole, like an ulcer, just a raw hole. This is kind of ulcerated too. It looks like it's on this gentleman's knuckle. That's kind of a big ugly thing. It's red, but you can see here it's bleeding and stuff, but there's a nodule here. Like, see that there? And squamous cells are almost always nodular. They're not usually flat. Now, a gentleman came in today for a follow-up I did last week. He had 3 flat red spots on his face last week. They were all tiny, itsy. Red spot here, red spot on the nose, and a red spot over here. I'm talking tiny. And I told him he didn't have to have it off, and he was insistent. He said, I've had basal cells in the past, just take them off. And he's in his early 80s. All 3 came back squamous cell. Totally blew me away. They didn't look anything like this. They looked like the basal cells I showed you on the previous slide. So unless the pathologist had having a little fun with me or something, but no, I think it was squamous cells. So squamous cells are definitely more noticeable and uglier than a basal cell. Commonplace for its top of the ear. So if you kind of use your imagination, this is the top of a gentleman's ear, and the squamous cells up here. And it's a nodule. It's actually a volcano-y nodule. That's what most squamous cells are. That, I think any third-year medical student would know is a squamous cell, and it has to come off. But the cure rate again is about 100%, which is good. We have a fast clicker here. Okay. I'm trying to think where that even is. Is that on the, yeah, the chin. Yeah, that's by the mouth, the chin.
That's his mustache.
Classic nodular looking skin lesion. Very, very unlikely to be a melanoma because it's not pigmented. Way bigger and uglier than a basal cell would be. So this is, again, probably a medical student diagnosis of a squamous cell. So this is on the gentleman's shoulder. Again, I don't know for a fact, I didn't take this picture. I'm guessing that's raised quite a bit. If you said, well, it looks like some of the basal cells. So basal cells are usually flat. And so if this is flat, I might think it's a basal cell, but it looks raised to me, so it's a squamous cell. That has that ulcer inside, and what you're seeing circular is raised. So again, you got to think of a volcano, kind of raised, and the inside is bloody and yucky and all that. We don't see him this has been there a long time. I'm guessing this gentleman had this for 5 or 7 or 8 years. I don't think this is an early basal cell, a squamous cell. To get that bad, you got to ignore it for quite a while.
Is it painful?
No, they don't. It's on the tongue. Any nodule on the tongue, well, besides those little blisters we get from hot liquids, but any painless nodule on the tongue is a cancer till proven otherwise. Any mole on the tongue is a cancer till proven otherwise. So fortunately, most people can see their tongues pretty well, so it's not hard to see. Again, 100% curable, easy to take out. You don't have to take out half the tongue. Just take out the nodule and the gentleman's cured. Another ear one, I think, in there. And again, ears are classic places for squamous cells, and this time you can see that white kind of waxy look on it. That's very common. We always throw one of those on as the glue factor.
That's a science fiction.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Very good point. Yeah, one of our members said this is, and that's got to be 5 or 10 years old. That's huge. Now, there's something called a cutaneous horn. You may have seen them. I think I've even had a couple myself, but they just start growing out like a horn. You could argue, well, how do you know this isn't a cutaneous horn? Well, I would think that's squamous cell, and I would bet 5 or 10 to 1 it is, but I wouldn't bet 1,000 to 1 it is. It could be a benign lesion. In this case, that's a squamous. And that's supposed to make you wonder, well, now that looks like the basal cell slide before. Yeah, it does, but it's not. It's a squamous cell, and again, you can't tell from the slide, but it's raised, nodular, and circular. And the basal cells, as I showed you, have very irregular borders. Squamous cells tend to be round and nodular. Not always, but usually. Now, squamous cells are more commonly excised, so the blue pen is the doctor deciding where he's going to cut to take out the squamous cell, but that's a classic squamous cell. It's raised, it's round, it's rough, it's nodular, pretty classic squamous cell there. Cure rate, if this doctor cuts in that plane, is close to 100%.
How old would that be?
It should be a year or two old, under a year. Yeah. And these are 2 squamous cells. This is to show you the concept of what we call satellite lesions. Frequently you'll have a primary cancer, and then really close to it you'll have a second one, and those are called satellite lesions. So I don't know which came first in this person, assuming it's a gentleman, but one was first, and then it kind of seeded the second one, kind of like, seeds in your garden, how you get a little tiny parsley plant next to the major parsley plant because the seeds fell over there. So. And another picture. So you can see in the melanoma they go much deeper. The basal cell we already kind of showed you in that basement membrane. The squamous cell starts in the same place as a basal cell, which is probably why they act similar. They have very similar clinical courses. And if you say, what's the difference? One of these called both the same cancer. What's what they see in the microscope? There are squamous cells that have a certain appearance that turn cancerous, and then there's basal cells that turn cancerous. So, but obviously the deeper it goes, the deeper they start, the worse the prognosis, and the more close to the top they are, the better the prognosis. So that's what that slide is supposed to show. I only put 3 things to treat a known or suspected squamous cell compared to basal cell, which had 5. Cautery is frequently done, but I wouldn't say that's done commonly because with the squamous cell, you saw how ugly most of those were, you really feel you need a biopsy of those. Where basal cell, you could say, well, it goes away, who cares? Also, squamous cells could metastasize or spread. I've never had one do that. In my whole career, I've never seen that, but it's reported. Especially for some reason on the scalp. Squamous cells are not uncommon on the scalp, especially in seniors. And there's such a narrow distance between the scalp and the skull, right? All you have is a tiny little bit of fat there. So it's easy to spread. The squamous cell on the scalp can spread to the skull pretty easily. Now I say pretty easily, again, I've never seen it happen, but that's what the books say. So because squamous cell has a slightly higher potential of spreading, because they're bigger and uglier looking and more classic, few doctors would want to just cauterize it. But it's doable, and that would be a very high cure rate if you did cauterize it. A shave is what I usually do. A shave is the same thing as a basal cell. You give a shot with Novocaine, raise it up, use a special scalpel, have a special type of electric type needle to desiccate it, and you're left with a blackish circle. The black circle stays black for a week or 2, turns into a red spot for a few months, and the red spot fades in the normal skin color. It might always be a little pale, but the scar isn't bad. Makes a big difference though. If it's a big, ugly looking squamous cell, I would always excise it like the picture you saw with the ink on it. If it's a smaller looking, maybe newer lesion, I think shaving is fine. Does it matter though? Again, cure rate close to 100%. Before I move on to the other cancer, any questions on squamous cell? Yes?
Out of skin lesions, in your professional opinion, what is the percentage of these types of spots?
Of lesions or of skin cancers?
Well, like somebody that has a lot of different body spots that may be erased or whatever, but I've been told like I have some that aren't
Right.
any of these.
Well, if we get you in one of these rooms and you've got 100 things on you, the odds of one of being squamous cell is probably less than 1%. So, now if you've had a previous squamous cell, I'd say 25%. If your father had a squamous cell, I'd say maybe 10-20%. So, all those factors I mentioned before. But they're not that common. I think I see them so often because I do a lot of biopsies and I get a lot of referrals for skin, and so I see a lot of them, but they're not that common, really. Basal cells are much more common. Okay. Yes?
So the excise, is that like when you take a stitch?
Yes,
Okay.
you like I showed you in that picture, you make a football-shaped
Cut it out,
excision,
and then,
cut it out, you're
another
left with a
stitch
gap,
is
then we
required.
stitch it to a straight line. Yeah. Okay, well, let's see, what am I doing here? No big surprise what that is. Of course, when you blow anything up, it looks terrible. But that is a melanoma. Black, irregular. I don't know if I have a slide on this, and I thought I did, but this is where we teach the medical students, the A, B, C, D, and E of skin lesions. So if you're looking at your partner or spouse's skin, or your own for that matter, but it's easier to look at somebody else's, do the A, B, C, D, E test, and that'll tell you whether you should come in and see us. A stands for asymmetry, and in Latin the word A is, the letter A means not. So asymmetry means not symmetrical. Well, this isn't round. So clearly this is asymmetrical, so that's a bad sign right there. B is borders. So you look at the borders. Well, this isn't good. Look at this. You know, like little peninsulas and harbors. If this were a map, so the more irregular the borders, the worse it is. So this also fails that one. C stands for color. Now it is true melanomas aren't always black, but they usually are. There are red ones, there are pale ones, there are brown ones. I mean, I've seen all different colors, but typically a mole that wasn't black and then turns black, or a mole that started black and got bigger black, a jet black mole isn't good as a rule. So this kind of feels that because that's very black. A, B, C, D is diameter. You could get a little measuring thing at your house, or an easy thing to do is to find a number 2 pencil that has not used the eraser, because 6 millimeters is the cutoff. You can get it before it's 7 millimeters. It either is rarely cancer, or it's what we call melanoma in situ. I think, okay, remember I taught a few of you had melanoma in situ. Melanoma in situ, the situ in Latin means the earliest stage. It means just that one day it turned from precancer to cancer. You found it right when it turned from precancer to cancer. That's in situ. The cure rate of a melanoma in situ is 100% if you take it off. That's when you want to get a melanoma, is when it's in situ. I doubt this one's in situ, but it might be, because that's a pathologic diagnosis under the microscope. Could you have a melanoma that's 5 millimeters? Yeah, but they'd almost always be in situ. The melanomas that are deeper and we worry about are 7 or more millimeters. If you can cover it with the eraser, the number 2 pencil, it's almost for sure under 6 millimeters or less, probably 5 millimeters. So if you see a mole on yourself that I don't look at tonight, you go home and what's that mole? And you put a pencil eraser on it, if it covers it, you're probably fine. E means elevate. That's a misleading term, because definitely elevated black moles are worse, but being flat by no means reassures you. A lot of melanomas are flat, right? So I guess they just had to think of something for E. But that's why most of us, when we teach medical students, have changed elevation to evolution. Evolution means it's changing. So let's say you had a mole that wasn't totally symmetrical, had little irregular borders, was jet black and maybe 5 millimeters. And you might say, God, that sounds scary. Well, take a picture of it. Everybody has an iPhone with a camera. Take a picture of it. And if it doesn't change for 6 months, a year and a half, 2 years, good chance it's not a melanoma. Melanomas change, and they usually change fairly quickly. Now, define quickly is within a year, not within a week, but within a year. So, in that case, obviously, this has to come off. And, gee, you've got a really schizophrenic clicker here. Same thing, look at the A, B, C, D, E. Of course, E, you don't know if it's changing. I'm assuming that it changed to this. You could say, well, it's not really asymmetric, because you could fold it in half like, you know, cut a line down the middle and fold it in half, and that would define symmetry. And I agree with you. I'd say, yeah, it's fairly symmetrical. But you don't have to have all of those to be a melanoma. You could have a symmetrical mole with irregular borders, and you can see the borders here. It's irregular there, irregular there. Color doesn't look good. What's almost worse than black is variegated, which is a fancy way of saying like Easter eggs that you have all the different dots in it, you know, all different colors. A little bit of brown, a little bit of black, a little bit of purple. That's not good. You don't want all those different colors in a mole. Better to be jet black than to be variegated. And this is variegated. See, it's pink and black and red and all sorts of different colors. I can't tell from the picture how big it is. That's not very big, which is good. But I know in advance it is a melanoma. So there's another very small one. This would, by definition, be in situ. That looks to me about 4 or 5 millimeters, just guessing. And that's kind of scary because it looks like just a regular brown mole. You know, you wouldn't even know that's melanoma. Would I take that off on a skin screen? Yeah, I would. I don't like that little spot in the middle. I don't like the borders. So, yeah, I'd probably take that off. I wouldn't blame a doctor for not taking it off, but by definition, it would evolve. So in 4 to 6 months, it would probably look a lot different than that. Forehead, irregular. And that's a case, I don't know what you can see from yours, it's not really that black. There's some brown in the background, but those are blood vessels. Remember I told you earlier, blood vessels in a mole aren't good. Even, of course, you don't know if it's a basal cell, squamous cell, or melanoma. This is one where I might tell the gentleman it might be a basal cell. Hard to tell. And he said, yeah, how do you tell? Well, that's why you biopsy. No, you can't tell. So you biopsy it, and that'll tell you what it is. This was biopsied to be a melanoma. This defines what they call, well, two things. First of all, as you can tell, melanomas can hit young people. I'm guessing she's in her 20s and she has a melanoma. I took a melanoma off a 16-year-old. That's my record. But I think our pediatricians here will have stories where they took it off even younger than 16. So it's possible. Unlike the other skin cancers, although melanomas aren't unheard of in the seniors, it seems to be like a 30 to 60 kind of peak, like mid-adulthood to pre-seniors get the highest incidence of melanomas. So she's, unfortunately, and of course that's a classic place because what do people like her do, at least historically, when they go to the beach? They lay on their tummy. And when they put sunscreen on, if they don't have a partner or a friend putting sunscreen on them, they slap it every which way, but that's a tough place to get with sunscreen. So they might have missed that spot there easily. And it's something we call the ugly duckling sign. We teach the medical students that. It's saved a number of lives, I know, because medical students have told me they found melanomas that way. Even if she had black moles here, 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 and here, see how that one just kind of stands out? Like, by itself, you might say, well, it's obviously a melanoma, all the criteria. Yeah, but you see how she has other moles, and then this ugly duckling is there? So when I do skin screens, and if I see one ugly duckling, we always take the ugly duckling off. And unfortunately, many times they are cancer. That's on the sole of the foot. Any mole on the white of the eye, palm of the hand, or sole of the foot is a melanoma until proven otherwise. They have to come off. There is some evidence they're benigner, if that's the correct word, meaning they don't spread as easily. It makes sense because there's not a lot of places to spread on the palm and sole. But where we might watch a soft mole on the back and arm and face, we never watch moles on the eyes, palms, or soles. Those are very frequently melanomas. After this talk we gave last year, one of the members was a gentleman, and he said, look, I saw my foot, and he had one on the sole. He had a mole on the sole of his foot. So we took it off like a week or two later. Came back benign, but it was atypical. Atypical is a fancy word for saying pre-cancer. So you could argue maybe his life was saved because he came to this lecture, I don't know. But once he showed me the mole on the sole of the foot, there's no way he was not going to get it off. Because so. Oh, and a fourth place I forgot to mention, nail beds. So beside eyes and palms and soles, add nail beds. Now don't worry, as everybody's looking at your nail beds here. If you hit yourself with a hammer, that's not it. We're not talking about a blood vessel, we're talking about a mole. And moles don't go away. This is different than the melanomas I've seen under nail beds. I've not really seen one that's streaked like that. The ones I saw were more round, like a round black mole. So this picture's a little weird, but you know, it is a melanoma. This is more your classic melanoma medical student picture. Irregular border, brown on the outside, black on the inside, jet black. I don't know how big it is, but that's classically a melanoma. This is a scary one. I took one of these off, identically off one of my patients a few years ago, and told her I think it's benign, but it could be a squamous cell. And it came back what they call an amelanotic melanoma. Remember I told you A means not. So it was a melanoma that had no melanin in it. Melanin is the hormone that makes it black. But it was still cancerous and it was still a melanoma. It just didn't have any melanin in it. So it's an amelanotic melanoma. I've taken off, I've been in practice a long time, but a couple dozen of these. but it's probably less than 5 or 10% of all melanomas, so don't worry too much. But this goes back to the red spot. You see a red spot and you think it's a basal cell or you think it's a sunspot.
And so last time we had a good turnout as well. This is awesome too. I think there's like a front and center open area for all the latecomers to sit in the front and be noticed by everyone. But I just wanted to take a quick poll of who we have here, what ages we're working with. The last time we didn't have a PowerPoint. It's easier to look at, but then I'm going to have to stand up and move around. But I just want to let you guys know that's why I'm getting up and everything. But so for our girls here, who is 8 years old? Who is 9 years old? Who's 10? Who's 11? 12? Fitting out, 13? And 14? Okay. Anybody who's 14 apparently knows everything about it. Which would make sense as we go through this. But okay, so did we do introductions? Kind of, sort of. We can do it again. I just again that I'm Dr. Christina Noldo. I've worked here for 2-ish years, and so I do an abbreviated version of this every time we have our physical exam. I usually start around 8 or 9 as well. So if you come and see me for your physical exam, which hopefully you guys do, or one of the other awesome pediatricians here, you will be pros at this, and I will say things and you'll be like, oh no, Dr. Arnold, I remember already from your talk. You don't have to do it, and then it will make the visit significantly shorter. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm going to stand down here. Yeah, go ahead. So for my side, it's puberty from girl to woman in 5 easy steps, because everyone likes easy steps. So this is my short disclaimer. There aren't a lot of pictures. There's just one picture of your body. But it is a cartoon, so it's not that graphic, but I just wanted to at least put that out there. I'm here to answer all of your questions and have no judgment whatsoever, okay, honey? So, puberty. It's a natural part of everyone's lives, but it happens at slightly different rates and different times for each people, okay? Your body makes hormones. They make estrogen, testosterone, okay? And it starts for boys and girls. That's pretty much in the same time, from 9 to 14. So that's why I asked around who's 8, who's 9. So most of you guys are 10, you might know about this, okay? This is just a small, I apologize when I